The year was 1947, and winter came early to the valley. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and the sound of the train passing the old station was the only reminder that the world outside still moved. The town of Ash Hollow sat in a quiet basin between the mountains, about a half-day's ride from Helena, though few ever made that trip anymore. The war had ended 2 years earlier, but the silence that settled afterward felt heavier than the sound of bombs. The people of Ash Hollow were good folk, or at least that's what they liked to believe. They went to church on Sundays, nodded politely at each other at the general store, and kept their fences painted even when they had no cows left to keep in. But if you stayed there long enough, you'd notice something off. Maybe it was the way they all looked at the clock tower on Main Street. The one that hadn't ticked since the night the fog came. It was November 2nd, 1947. When I first arrived, the station was nearly empty. Just one man behind the counter and a pot of coffee that had been boiling down to tar. The man looked up, his eyes dull, the kind of dull that comes from years of waiting for something that never arrives. I asked him if there was a place to stay for the night. He said there was a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Calder, up on Willow Street, just past the church outside. The snow was thin, falling slow, like ashes instead of flakes. The streets were too quiet for a Saturday. I passed a bar with its lights on, but no music, no laughter, just the faint hum of a jukebox playing the same record over and over. It was an old Glenn Miller tune, warped and tired. Across the street stood the clock tower. Black hands frozen at 317. Mrs. Calder's house was warm, filled with the smell of cedar and something baking. She was a small woman, gray hair pinned tight, eyes that had seen too much and refused to forget. She asked my name, but when I gave it, she only nodded as if it didn't matter. She handed me a brass key attached to a wooden tag with the number 5 carved in. "Don't mind the noise at night," she said. "Wind carries strange here." I didn't know what she meant until the lights went out later that evening. The wind had a way of whispering, not the kind of hollow howl that comes from trees, but voices. Not words exactly, more like breaths caught between syllables. I thought maybe it was just the pipes, or maybe the radio from the next room. But when I went to check, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I went out early. The sun was pale and distant. Main Street looked almost painted, each window still, each curtain drawn. A man in a brown coat swept dust that never seemed to go away. I asked him how long the clock had been broken. He didn't stop sweeping. He just said, "Since the fog." "What fog?" I asked. He looked up at me then, his eyes hollow like the station man's. "You'll hear about it soon enough," he said. Later that day, I found the church. It stood at the top of a small hill overlooking the town, the bell tower cracked, but still holding. Inside, the pews were covered in a fine layer of dust. There were candles burnt down to nubs, hymn books left open on the same page, "Abide with me." And near the altar, a photograph sat in a frame. A man in a mailman's uniform, standing beside the same church, smiling. Under the frame was a name carved by hand. Elliot Crane. The name felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. When I asked Mrs. Calder that evening, she looked startled. "You saw his picture?" she said softly. "He was the last postman we had. Kept the town alive, in a way. Brought news, letters, all of it." Then one morning he was gone, took his route as usual, never came back. That must be 12 years ago now. Did they find him? I asked. No, just his bag and one letter, but no one here will speak of it. The days passed quietly. I started to notice how no one seemed to age. Not that they looked young, but that they didn't look different. The same faces at the diner each morning. The same couple arguing on the porch across from the hardware store. The same kids kicking the same ball that never got dirty. There was no sense of time moving forward. Only the slow repetition of things that once had meaning. At night, the wind came again. I could hear it through the walls, whispering like an old radio signal half-tuned. Sometimes it carried a name, a woman's name. Other times it sounded like laughter, distant and hollow. I tried to sleep, but the dreams came vivid. A road lined with bare trees, a red flag over the post office door, and a clock striking 13 times. One morning, I decided to walk beyond the town's edge. The snow there was untouched. The air grew heavier, colder, as though I were walking through memory itself. About a mile out, I saw a mailbox standing alone by the road, rusted but upright. On it was carved Crane. Inside, there was a single envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind people used before machines did it for them. The letter inside said only, "If you find this, it means time has forgotten us again. Don't stay past the first bell." I turned back toward the town. The sky had changed. Clouds gathering low, heavy, like smoke rolling over hills. When I reached Main Street, everything looked slightly different. The shop signs had older lettering. The cars on the street were models from another decade. The people wore thicker coats, their faces unfamiliar yet somehow known. Inside the diner, the same song played, but slower, warped as though dragged through water. I asked the waitress what year it was. She blinked, as if the question itself didn't make sense. "Why, it's 1935, sir," she said. I laughed, thinking she was joking. But outside, the newspaper box read March 12, 1935. I looked at my watch. The hands had stopped. 3:17. That night, the wind grew stronger. The church bell rang once, though no one had touched it. I went to the window and saw figures moving through the fog. Faint, blurred, like shadows made of breath. And among them, a man in a postman's coat, holding a lantern. He looked up at my window, his face pale, calm, eyes clear as glass. He lifted the lantern once, like a greeting, then walked toward the church. I don't know why, but I followed. The streets were empty, but for the sound of boots crunching snow. The fog thickened until even my hands disappeared in front of me. I reached the church door and pushed it open. Inside, the candles burned again, all of them. The photograph was gone. In its place was a letter on the altar, sealed with red wax. The wax bore the shape of a clock. I broke it open. Inside was a single line. "He remembers for all of us." And then, as if time itself exhaled, the bell above me rang 13 times. Each chime felt like a heartbeat. Each one pulled the fog closer. When the last echo faded, I was standing alone in the dark. The candles were gone. The door behind me had vanished. And then, there was silence. Not the kind of silence that lives between sounds, but a deeper one, like the air itself forgot how to exist. That's when I heard the whisper, close to my ear. Tomorrow belongs to you now. The voice was neither male nor female, only familiar. I turned, but there was nothing, only the scent of cedar and smoke, and a single letter lying at my feet, addressed to no one. The letter at my feet trembled as the wind crawled through the cracks of the church walls. I picked it up with both hands, though they felt numb, more from something deeper than cold. The envelope was blank, no name, no address, no return. Only the faint impression of a thumbprint on the wax seal, like someone had pressed it shut in a hurry or in fear. I broke the seal slowly. The paper inside was soft, fragile, the ink almost gone. It read, "If you are reading this, you have stepped past the veil. The town will not let you go until it remembers itself." I read the line twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. Remembers itself? What could that mean? The air inside the church grew thick. Dust rose in slow spirals, like smoke without fire. I turned toward the exit, but where the wooden door had stood, there was only a wall of stone. I pressed my hands against it. It was solid, cold, real. The candles flickered and went out, one by one, until only a single light remained near the altar. Beneath it, I saw the faint outline of footsteps, wet prints leading toward the back of the chapel. I followed them without thinking, my boots echoing louder than they should have. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the floorboards were holding me down. At the end of the aisle was a side door I hadn't noticed before. It creaked open easily, revealing a staircase leading underground. The air smelled of rust and rain-soaked earth. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. The whisper came again, faint, somewhere below. "Tomorrow belongs to you now." My breath caught. The voice was close, softer this time, almost comforting. I descended. The light from above faded as I went deeper. Soon there was nothing but the sound of dripping water, echoing like a heartbeat. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in what looked like an old storage cellar, shelves lined with jars, candle stubs, rotting hymnals. In the corner stood a wooden desk covered in papers, letters stacked high, each stamped and addressed to people I didn't know. But one detail made my skin crawl. Every envelope bore the same return name, Elliot Crane. Some were dated 1930, others 1947, and a few carried no year at all, just a mark of ink that had bled too much to read. I opened one at random. Inside was a letter written in a looping, steady hand. "If the fog comes again, do not hide. Walk into it. Only then will you see what was taken." I opened another. "The bell rings 13 for each soul still waiting. I am one of them." Another. "When time resets, the post must still be delivered." The letters blurred in front of me. My vision swam. I felt a strange pulse beneath my feet, like the heartbeat of the ground itself. Then the whisper changed, no longer behind me, but inside my head. "Do you remember?" I dropped the letter. My knees hit the dirt. Images began to flash behind my eyes, streets filled with fog, faces turning to light, the clock tower melting into mist. And there, at the center of it all, the postman, lantern in hand, walking through time as if it were just another route. When I came to, the candles had all relit themselves. On the desk was a fresh letter, ink still wet. I hadn't seen it before. My name wasn't on it, only the words, "Deliver this." I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should, like something inside was alive. The back door of the cellar was now open, leading out into the cold night. Outside, the fog had thickened again. The town looked different, yet again older, darker. The street lamps burned with yellow fire instead of electricity. The houses had no glass in their windows. A horse stood tethered outside the general store where cars had once been. I walked down the street, letter in hand. A sign above the post office swung on rusted hinges. The windows were boarded. The paint faded almost to nothing. But through the cracks, I saw light. Inside, a man sat at a desk sorting letters by candlelight. His back was to me, his coat thick and gray, his hair silver in the glow. He didn't look up when I entered. I spoke softly. "Are you?" Before I could finish, he answered, without turning, "Elliot Crane, you shouldn't be here." His voice was low, steady, the kind that could have been kind once, before time took the warmth from it. I stepped closer. "You left this for me," I said, holding up the letter. He finally turned. His face was lined, tired, but not unkind. "No," he said quietly. "You left it for me." My throat went dry. "What are you talking about?" He stood, pushing the chair back with a slow scrape. "Time doesn't move here the way it should. We've been passing the same day between us for years. Each time it ends, one of us remembers just long enough to start it again. That's impossible," I whispered. He smiled sadly. "You think I didn't say that once too?" He walked past me, opened the door, and looked out toward the clock tower. "It's always 3:17. No matter how long we talk, no matter what we do, the bell rings, the fog comes, and it begins again." I looked down at the letter still in my hand. "Then what is this for?" Elliot turned his gaze toward it, his eyes hollow but steady. "That's the key. Every time, it finds its way to someone new, someone who still believes the day can change, someone who hasn't given up remembering." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint light of the candle flicker in his eyes. "You can break it," he said, "but you'll have to take my place." Before I could answer, the ground shook a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from under the town. The clock tower began to toll, slow and heavy. 1, 2, 3. Elliot's face twisted with something between sorrow and relief. "It's starting again." The wind outside roared like a living thing. The fog poured through the cracks in the door. Elliot reached into his coat and handed me a small brass key, the same kind Mrs. Calder had given me for the room at her boarding house. "When the bell stops," he said, "go back to where it began. The town only remembers what it's willing to forgive." The bell tolled again, the sound shaking the glass in the windows. I stumbled backward. The fog swallowed the room and Elliot was gone. Only the desk remained, and the letter still unopened. I ran outside, but the streets were gone. In their place stretched an endless field of snow and dead trees. The clock tower standing alone in the distance. Its face glowed faintly, hands still locked at 3:17. I started walking toward it, each step slower than the last. The fog pressed against me, thick and alive, whispering fragments of sentences, voices overlapping like 1,000 broken radios. "Deliver the promise. She's waiting. You have to remember." When I reached the tower, the door swung open by itself. Inside was darkness, and the smell of iron and old smoke. The stairs spiraled up into nothing. I climbed. Each step creaked, and with every turn, the world outside grew fainter, until all that remained was the sound of my own breathing and the slow tick of something above me. At the top, I found the bell. It was cracked down the middle, blackened by time. Beneath it sat a wooden chest. The same brass key fit perfectly into its lock. I turned it, and the lid opened with a sound like a sigh. Inside were hundreds of letters, each addressed in my own handwriting. I lifted one. The date read November 2nd, 1947, the same day I arrived. I opened it. If you find this, it means I've failed again. Don't forget her name this time. Before I could react, a soft voice echoed from behind me. A woman's voice, trembling but gentle. You always forget. I turned. She stood in the doorway, young, eyes gray like rain, face familiar in a way that twisted my chest. She stepped closer, her hand brushing against the edge of the bell. You promised you'd remember, she whispered. Who are you? I asked, my voice breaking. Her eyes filled with tears. You said that last time too. The bell above us began to move, slowly, though no wind touched it. One toll, deep and heavy. She looked at me, sadness washing over her face. When it stops, you'll forget again, and I'll still be waiting. The fog poured through the cracks in the tower, wrapping around her form like smoke. She reached out, touched my cheek, and whispered a name I couldn't quite hear. The sound faded. The world dimmed. The last thing I remember was her hand slipping away, and the bell tolling for the 13th time. Then there was nothing but light. Light. At first it felt like morning, but when I opened my eyes, the sky above me wasn't the color of dawn. It was the color of old film left too long in sunlight. Faded gold, cracked at the edges. I was lying in the field outside Ash Hollow, the church bell silent behind me, half buried in fog. Snow drifted in soft spirals, though the air was warm enough to breathe without seeing frost. I pushed myself up. The tower was gone. In its place stood a single wooden post with a rusted mailbox attached. The name Crane had been scratched out. Below it, someone had written another word, carved deep into the metal. Remember. I opened the box. Inside was a single photograph. A woman standing in front of the church, holding a lantern. Her face was the same one I'd seen in the tower, eyes gray like rain. On the back, written in careful script, you promised to deliver the last letter. The air shifted. I heard the faint creak of a wagon, the murmur of voices. Footsteps crunch in gravel. When I turned, the town was alive again, not ghostly, not frozen, but real. Children ran along the street. A dog barked. The smell of bread drifted from the bakery. Cars rattled past, and smoke rose from chimneys. For a moment, I thought I had escaped the loop, but then I saw the calendar in the store window. November 2nd, 1947, the same date again. I walked down Main Street, searching for any sign of Elliot. The woman, the fog, the clock tower loomed above. Hands still locked at 3:17. The bell rope swayed, though there was no wind. Inside the diner, the same waitress poured coffee into chipped white cups. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes didn't recognize me. "You're new in town?" she asked, just like before. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. "How long have you lived here?" She thought for a moment. "All my life, I guess." Then her smile faltered. Or maybe just today. Outside, a man in a postman's coat crossed the street, a leather bag slung over his shoulder. I ran after him, calling out, but he didn't turn. He disappeared around the corner by the hardware store. When I reached the spot, the street was empty. Only a single envelope lay in the snow, half buried. I picked it up. The handwriting was mine again. The seal bore the mark of a clock, delivered to the one who waits by the river. The river lay a mile east of town. I followed the old road until the houses gave way to open fields. The sun hung low, pale and tired. The wind carried faint echoes. Children laughing, a woman humming a hymn. When I reached the bridge, I saw her. She stood on the far side, coat fluttering, lantern in hand. The same woman from the photograph. Her reflection shimmered in the water, though the river itself didn't move. I called out, "Who are you?" She smiled, a small, sorrowful curve of her lips. "You already know." "I don't," I said. "I can't remember." She nodded slowly. "That's what you always say." I stepped closer. "Tell me, please. You were the one who stayed," she said. "When the fog came, everyone ran. But you carried their memories. You wrote them down so they wouldn't vanish. That's why time keeps returning. Because you won't let go." "I'm not," I began, but the words caught in my throat. Images flickered again, letters piling on a desk, names fading from envelopes, a bell tolling as faces dissolved into mist. She reached into her coat and drew out a letter. "The same one I carried. Every cycle, you deliver this to me. And every time, you forget what it means." I took it from her. My hands trembled. "Then, what's inside? Open it," she whispered. The seal broke easily. Inside was a single line of ink, barely visible. "Forgive me." I looked up. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You wrote that for me," she said, "before the town fell asleep. You said you'd carry everyone's memories, even mine, until the world remembered itself." I wanted to speak, to tell her I didn't understand. But my chest ached, and the wind rose, sweeping snow across the bridge. She stepped closer. "Every time you wake, the town begins again. Every time you forget, the fog returns. Let it go this time, please." The ground beneath us shook. The clock tower bell began to toll, distant but clear. 1. The river rippled for the first time. 2. The lantern light flickered. 3. The world blurred. She reached out, touched my face. "If you want to break it, don't deliver the letter this time. Burn it." "I can't," I said. "It's all I have." "That's why you're still here," she whispered. 4, 5, 6. The bell kept tolling. She pressed her hand against my chest. "Promise me. If you wake again, you'll remember my name." "What is it?" I asked. Her lips moved, but the wind swallowed the sound. Then she smiled, a soft, forgiving smile, and stepped backward into the fog. 7, 8, 9. "Wait!" I shouted. But she was already gone. The fog rolled across the bridge, wrapping around me like water. I stumbled backward, clutching the letter. 10, 11, 12. The world dimmed to gray. 13. The bell's last echo hung in the air like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Then silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the post office. The desk, the candle, the stack of letters, all as before. Outside, dawn painted the windows gold. The calendar on the wall read November 3rd, 1947. A new day. The silence felt different. The air moved. Somewhere in the distance, birds called. I looked down at my hands. The letter was gone. In its place was the photograph, the woman by the church. But now, beneath her image, a name was written clearly, Anna Crane. I stared at it until the edges blurred. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Elliot stood there, or what was left of him, a faint outline of a man made of dust and light. You remembered, he said softly. She was your wife. I whispered. He nodded. And yours, once. The town was ours. We built it out of memory and promise. What happens now? Elliot looked toward the window where sunlight touched the frost. Now it ends. You carried tomorrow long enough. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and for a moment, the warmth felt real. Then he faded, like smoke rising from a dying fire. The room brightened. The letters on the desk turned to dust, drifting upward, dissolving into the air. Outside, the clock tower began to move, the hands ticking forward for the first time in years. 3:18. The world exhaled. The fog lifted from the streets. Doors opened. Voices returned. Children laughed, real and alive. I stepped outside, the light sharp and clean. The sky was blue again, not sepia, not stained by memory. For the first time since I arrived, Ash Hollow felt like a place that could breathe. On the steps of the church, a single envelope waited. No seal, no name, just one sentence scrawled in neat handwriting. Thank you for remembering. I smiled without knowing why. Then I walked down the road toward the horizon, the morning sun at my back, the town behind me whispering itself awake. Somewhere, far away, a bell rang, just once, and it didn't echo. Morning light spilled across Main Street, like someone had finally opened the shutters on the world. For the first time since I arrived, the wind smelled of live fresh hay, coffee, a hint of soap from someone washing clothes in the back alley. The clock tower chimed 7 o'clock. Real time, moving time. I stood beneath it and waited for the sound to fade, half expecting the hands to freeze again. They didn't. People were everywhere. The same faces I'd seen frozen in endless repetition now laughed, argued, carried boxes, greeted one another with surprise as though they'd woken from a long dream and were just discovering their own lives. Mrs. Calder waved from the steps of the boarding house, flower on her hands. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said with a grin. Maybe I have, I told her. She laughed. The sound bright, human. Well, whoever they were, they must have been kind to you. You've got color back in your cheeks. Inside the diner, the jukebox played a new song. Not the warped Glenn Miller tune anymore, but something gentle, sentimental journey. The waitress, younger somehow, poured me coffee and asked if I was passing through or planning to stay. I haven't decided yet, I said. She nodded. You'll know when the train whistle sounds. That's what my father always said. When you hear it, it means you're ready to go. I smiled. Has the train come lately? She frowned slightly. Not since before the fog. Then, realizing what she'd said, she shook her head, as if correcting a slip she couldn't explain. I mean, not in a long time. Outside, the snow had melted into thin streams along the gutters. Children splashed through them, their laughter echoing off the buildings. I watched them for a while, feeling a strange ache in my chest, something like joy, but heavier. By noon, the sun was strong enough to turn the rooftops to mirrors. I walked toward the church, half expecting it to be gone again, but it stood tall and clean, the bell polished, the doors newly painted white. Inside, candles burned steadily. No dust, no cobwebs. On the altar lay a single open hymnal, and beside it the photograph of Anna Crane. She was smiling, eyes bright, not the sorrowful figure from before. Beneath her picture, someone had written, "She remembered first." I sat in the front pew for a long time, listening to the soft creak of the wood as the building settled. Through the window I could see people passing, carrying baskets of bread, talking, living. For the first time, I thought maybe this was what Elliot had meant, time forgiving itself. When I left the church, a low sound rolled across the valley, the distant call of a train whistle. The waitress's words came back to me. I followed the sound down to the station. The platform was alive with motion. Men loaded crates. Women carried luggage. A conductor checked his watch. The locomotive itself looked brand new, steel glinting in the sunlight, steam curling into the blue. The sign above the platform read to Helena, departing 3:17 p.m. That number made me stop. The clock on the platform confirmed it 3 p.m. In 17 minutes the train would leave. I bought a ticket without thinking. As the paper touched my hand, a flicker of cold passed through me, like memory brushing skin. The clerk, an older man with clear blue eyes, smiled faintly. "Been a long time since anyone bought one of those," he said. "Why's that?" "Trains stopped running after the fog," he answered, then blinked as though the words surprised him. "Funny. Don't know why I said that. Line's been open all year." I walked to the edge of the platform. Beyond the tracks the fields stretched gold and endless, the mountains standing quiet in the distance. Everything looked alive, yet there was a faint shimmer at the horizon, a mirage that reminded me of the fog's edge. I waited. The whistle sounded again, deep, clear, calling. People boarded, laughter echoing, boots clanging on the steps. I hesitated, ticket in hand. Something inside me whispered that leaving meant forgetting again, staying meant remembering forever. A child tugged at my coat. "Mister, you dropped this." She held out a folded piece of paper. "I don't think it's mine," I said. "It was under your shoe," she insisted. I took it. The paper was yellowed, edges frayed. My heart slowed as I saw the handwriting. Mine. The same looping script as every letter before. I opened it carefully. "If you hear the train, it means the town has remembered enough to let you go, but not all of it. Someone must stay to keep the story alive." No signature. Only a small symbol drawn at the bottom, a clock with its hands moving, finally free. The conductor called, "All aboard." The ground seemed to hum. I looked toward the town. Sunlight glimmered off the windows, and for a moment I saw silhouettes standing still, watching me. Among them, near the church steps, a woman's figure, Anna. She lifted her hand in farewell, or perhaps in warning. The whistle blew once more. The minute hand on the platform clock clicked to 3:17. I didn't move. The train began to pull away, slow at first, then faster, its rhythm echoing like a heartbeat fading down the valley. Steam rolled across the platform, wrapping around me. When it cleared, I was alone again. The clerk had vanished. The station looked older, dustier. The clock above the door had stopped. 3:17. I stepped outside. Main Street was quiet, not lifeless, but slowed, as if the town were catching its breath. The sky dimmed slightly, the light turning that sepia gold again. Somewhere far off, a single bell rang soft, uncertain. I walked back toward the church. On the way, the world seemed to blur at the edges. The bakery window showed no bread. The children's laughter had become faint echoes. Yet, I felt no fear, only understanding. When I reached the church, the door was open. Inside, the candle still burned. The photograph of Anna remained, but a new one had joined it, a man standing beside her, hand in hand. The writing beneath both read, "They delivered the promise." I smiled. For the first time, I understood. The town wasn't cursed. It was remembering itself through us, each loop a chance to restore what had been lost, to write over the gaps where names had vanished. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the steps. The sound wasn't the whisper of the old fog, but something softer, like pages turning. I sat on the bench near the gate and watched as the sky deepened into evening. Lamps flickered to life one by one. People walked home with groceries. Couples lingered under the streetlights. Normal life, fragile and precious. The clock tower chimed again for p.m. Each strike sounded like a heartbeat returning. As the last note faded, I felt a warmth spread through me. The weight that had lived in my chest since the day I arrived finally lifted. I closed my eyes, listening to the town breathe. Somewhere a radio played faint jazz, the kind of tune that made time feel endless. Then, just as the song changed, a low murmur reached my ears, distant, uncertain, like a memory waking too soon. I opened my eyes. Across the street, a man stood under the lamppost. He wore a long coat, a leather mailbag over his shoulder. He looked up at me, and for a heartbeat, I thought it was Elliot, but it wasn't. The man was younger, his face unfamiliar, though his eyes carried the same quiet knowing. He raised a hand in greeting. "Evening," he said. "I'm the new postman. Folks said you might have a letter for me." My breath caught. "Maybe I do," I answered. He smiled. "Then I guess the route goes on." He turned and walked down the street, boots echoing softly on the cobblestones, disappearing into the glow of the lamplight. I looked down. On the bench beside me lay a blank envelope, its seal marked with a single moving clock. The hands were turning. I didn't open it. Some promises, I realized, were meant to be carried, not read. The church bell rang once more, clear and steady, and the night settled around Ash Hollow, not in silence this time, but in peace. And somewhere far above, beyond the sound of wind and memory, the ticking of time went on. The morning air was crisp, sharp with the scent of pine and thawing snow. Ash Hollow had settled into its rhythm, as though it had remembered itself completely, though the faint pulse of something older lingered beneath the surface. The streets were alive. Children chased one another along the sidewalks. Women hung laundry in the backyard, and men carried tools or crates with laughter threading their voices. Yet I could not shake the feeling that beneath this calm, the town held a memory waiting to awaken. I walked slowly past the general store, watching a boy trip over his shoelaces and fall into the snow. He rose immediately, laughing, and ran on, leaving a faint trail of footprints that melted almost as soon as they were made. The patterns reminded me of the letters Elliot had delivered. the messages I had carried. It was a loop in miniature. Life unfolding, vanishing, and being remembered again. The church stood quietly at the hilltop, bell intact and polished. I climbed the steps, hesitant, my eyes scanning the wooden doors for the photograph of Anna. She was there, as before, smiling, steady. But now the photograph rested beside another this time, a man in uniform, holding her hand. Beneath the two, the inscription read, "Together, the town remembers." I sat in the pew, feeling the warmth of sunlight spill through the stained glass, casting muted colors across the floor. It felt ordinary, almost mundane, but in its ordinariness lay the miracle. Ash Hollow had woken. The post office across the street had changed. The windows reflected the morning sun, clear and new, the paint fresh. I crossed and pushed open the door, expecting an empty desk, but it was occupied by a young man. A uniform, a bag slung over his shoulder, a presence quiet but certain. The new postman. He glanced at me, nodding politely. "I hear there's a letter for me," he said. I reached into my coat pocket. A blank envelope rested there, sealed with the single moving clock. I handed it over, feeling the weight of generations in that small paper. He took it without hesitation, slipping it into his bag. "You'll find it arrives to the right hands," I said. He smiled faintly. "I trust it will. That's how the route works, isn't it?" The wind carried the faint smell of cedar and smoke, a memory lingering from the old postman's time. I nodded, understanding now. The cycle had shifted, moved forward, and yet remained. Some stories, some duties were too vital to end entirely. They lived in the people who remembered, in the letters they delivered, and in the quiet spaces between the bell tolls. I left the post office and walked the streets of Ash Hollow, noticing every detail: the chipped paint on the schoolhouse, the new wood on the bridge, the steam rising from the bakery chimney. Everything was alive, yet everything carried the weight of history. The town's memories were stitched into the walls, the cobblestones, the frost patterns on windows. To forget entirely was impossible. To remember fully was a gift. A child ran past me, her laughter echoing like wind through pine trees. I caught a glimpse of her face and saw in it the reflection of every life I had witnessed here. The faces of those who had vanished, the letters left behind, the quiet devotion of Elliot Crane. The town was not just living, it was carrying its past forward. I found myself at the riverbank, where the fog had once gathered like a living thing. Now, the water moved freely, catching the sun in glittering patterns. The bridge was solid beneath my feet. I looked across it, remembering the figure of Anna, the warmth of her hand, the sorrowful plea to carry the memories. She was gone from sight, but her presence remained, etched into the town as surely as the stones beneath my feet. I knelt and let my fingers brush the surface of the water. It rippled, reflecting the sunlight in fractals that seemed infinite. The letter I had carried the promise was gone from my pocket, left with the new postman. And in that moment, I understood. The town had remembered, and in doing so, it had given me a freedom I hadn't known I wanted. The clock tower struck noon. 13 strikes, clear and deliberate, and then a 14th, lighter, almost playful, as if to remind me that some things could not be counted, only felt. I watched the shadow of the bell move across the street, brushing the windows. the cobblestones, the faces of people who no longer lived in loops. A soft whistle reached me from the horizon. Not the train that had once carried passengers endlessly between yesterday and tomorrow, but a real train, arriving from the larger world, beyond Ash Hollow. Its steel glinted in the sunlight, its steam a white cloud that dissipated quickly, promising journeys, departures, arrivals, life beyond this small forgotten town. I stood and began walking toward it. Each step felt lighter, the burden of memory easing with the sun on my back. Behind me, the town breathed, moved, and remembered itself fully. The children's laughter, the merchants' chatter, the smell of bread and pine and coal, it all carried forward, woven into a tapestry of ordinary life that had survived extraordinary odds. Before stepping onto the platform, I glanced once more at Ash Hollow. The street stretched empty for a moment, then filled again, as if the town had waited for my attention to release it fully into the day. I smiled, a quiet, steady smile, feeling a sense of closure deeper than words could hold. The stories of those who had lived, vanished, and returned would continue, but no longer in loops that trapped them. The train's whistle blew again. I climbed aboard, leaving behind the streets, the clock tower, the church, and the river that had carried so many memories. As the train moved forward, the town shrank behind me, sunlit and alive. I felt the weight of all those letters, all those promises, settle into something warm and lasting. Ash Hollow would endure, not as a ghost or a loop, but as a living, breathing town, carrying its history forward through the people who remembered. And in that moment, I understood fully what Elliot Crane had meant. Some memories must be carried, some promises kept, and some letters delivered not to close the story, but to allow it to continue. The train rolled on, the horizon widening with each turn, the world stretching out before me. The bell of Ash Hollow rang faintly in my mind, once more a heartbeat among many, and I knew, as the sun rose higher, that the town would never forget again. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, the wind carried a faint echo. "Thank you for remembering." I leaned back, letting the rhythm of the rails and the warmth of the sun fill me. For the first time, I was free to step into tomorrow. Ash Hollow, at last, had remembered.